Welcome to For Name and Glory, where we look at where names in games come from, whether it be weapons, summons, characters, or anything else. I take a look at the stories and tales behind the names, then see how games have presented them. Because if you're anything like me, when you learn about these kinds of things, you get that awesome feeling of, oh, now I get it. And to be honest, most of you want to be force-fed the info anyways, because it's much easier to watch a video than it is to go research yourself. But I highly suggest that you go look up some stuff yourself. In this first episode, we will be looking at some famous swords of Final Fantasy. Now to start off, we're going to look at one of the most famous swords of all time, Excalibur. Most people probably know about King Arthur's legendary sword, but a lot of people probably think that this is a sword he pulled out of the stone, which proved he was the rightful heir to the throne of Uther Pendragon. And while it is easy to think this is true, since a lot of media gets this wrong, like the Sword in the Stone Disney movie, this was not the same sword as Excalibur. For most stories, the Sword in the Stone had no name, whereas others just miscasted the name as Excalibur, which was given to Arthur by the Lady of the Lake. Excalibur's name, apparently originally in Welsh, is Calfo, but eventually, through French translation, became Excalibur, and then Excalibur. In some stories, Excalibur is said to have interesting properties. Like when drawn from the scabbard, Excalibur is so bright it blinds enemies. But the awesomeness doesn't stop there. Excalibur's scabbard prevented the wearer from bleeding. Some tales said it basically made the wearer invincible. And in one tale, Morgan Le Fay, Arthur's evil half-sister, steals the scabbard and throws it into a lake, and it is never seen again. Now, let's take a look at it in games. Excalibur is quite the blade. It has appeared in numerous Final Fantasy games, starting with the first. It was made with adamantite, and is the second strongest weapon in the game, used by the knight. In Final Fantasy IV, it's once again one of the strongest swords for Cecil. Cecil? Whatever. Also made with adamantite for some reason. In Final Fantasy V, it is one of the legendary sealed weapons, but more notable is Gilgamesh, who, on his quest to find Excalibur, has found a cheap knockoff called Excalibur, which only does 1 damage. In most games that Gilgamesh appears in, he usually has both Excalibur and Excalibur. And Excalibur is usually a holy elemental attack, while Excalibur does like 1 damage. In both Final Fantasy VI and IX, it is one of the strongest swords, and is holy elemental. And my favorite use of Excalibur in any Final Fantasy game is in Tactics. It is Orlando's, the badass, initial equipped weapon, which is holy elemental and has auto haste on it, making it one of the best swords. I know Excalibur has appeared in many other games, but I just wanted to show that Final Fantasy has used a little bit of the actual history of the sword. They usually make it one of the strongest swords, and the cooler thing in my opinion is the holy elemental they give it, since you kinda associate King Arthur as a bringer of light, and his blade a divine one. They do fit a little of the story behind the sword, although if you know of any games that include that scabbard's ability with a blinding effect, I would love to hear that. Masamune was known as Japan's greatest swordsmith. While we are unsure exactly when he lived, it is generally agreed that it was in the 13th and 14th centuries. He was known for making swords of superior quality and beauty. Masamune has many legends about him and another famous swordsmith, Muramasa. And generally, Masamune in these legends is painted as being a more holier being, and Muramasa is the one depicted as being evil. While these legends don't hold up since Muramasa lived 300 years after Masamune, the media has created these stories nonetheless. Muramasa, named after the swordsmith Muramasa Sengo, who lived during the Muromachi period in Japan. A lot of stories claim that he was mad, and his traits passed on to his blades, which were said to hunger for blood. Some stories go as far as saying once the blade has been removed from the scabbard, it has to draw blood before it can be returned, even if this meant the wielder had to commit suicide. There is one famous tale about Masamune and Muramasa, where Muramasa challenges Masamune to make a perfect sword. They both then make swords, and then to test the swords, they place them in a river, where Muramasa cuts everything in its way, like fish and leaves. Masamunes didn't cut anything. Then a monk who watched the demonstration talked to them, and said that the first blade, while well constructed, is bloodthirsty, and Masamunes did not needlessly cut that which was undeserving. The monk then deemed Masamunes the better sword. So basically, Masamune is holy and Muramasa is unholy. Now let's take a look at these weapons in games. In the first Final Fantasy, Masamune is the strongest sword and can be used by all classes. In Final Fantasy IV, it is Edge's strongest weapon, and casts the haste spell. In Final Fantasy V, it is also one of the legendary sealed weapons. And again, it is also one of Gilgamesh's weapons in his recurring role. And in Final Fantasy IX, it is one of Zidaine's thief swords. In Final Fantasy X, it is Auron's celestial weapon. But the most iconic appearance is in Final Fantasy VII, where it is Sephiroth's oversized sword. It is interesting to note that Final Fantasy doesn't depict Masamune as holy. Another famous appearance of Masamune is in Chrono Trigger, where it is Frog's strongest weapon, and it also has its own boss. But this is only an English version, because in the Japanese version, the sword is called the Grand Leon. So let's look at Muramasa in Final Fantasy games. In Final Fantasy X, Auron uses it, and it has the triple overdrive, triple AP, and overdrive into MP abilities, making it a great grinding weapon. But the most notable appearance, I think, is in Final Fantasy Tactics, where its text reads, referred to as a demon sword, this katana was said to drink the blood of countless enemies, or a peculiar sword that sucks large amounts of blood. And when using the samurai ability, it inflicts death sentence or confusion. So this blade definitely reflects the story's honor. Now let's take a look at a blade commonly mistaken as either Muramasa or Masamune. The Morrisane. This name means village rain, although it is commonly translated as autumn rain. And once again, let's look at Final Fantasy Tactics, where we see that they use its meaning to support its ability. When the samurai uses it, it summons a gentle rain that restores HP to allies around the user. And it also appears in most of the other Final Fantasy games as a strong sword or katana. But its most iconic appearance is in Final Fantasy VII. It's 7?